Chapter 1. How do I actually write a comic? Find your niche. Before you can write anything, you need to figure out what you want to write. Doing this is in one way hard, because, after all, the universe is kind of infinite, and, well, you have nothing, or everything. Sure, it can be done, kind of. After all, there are a lot of single-panel, general wacky, offbeat panels and strips like Herman and The Far Side. But even these have their own little niche. The Far Side's niche is looking at the absurd side of things, while putting them into everyday funny terms that we can all identify with. Well, most of us. Herman's niche more so shows the mundane, frustrating parts of the life of an everyman, and makes him funny. So, even if you want to write a generalized, funny comic, you still need to find your little niche. You don't want your comics to be interchangeable with somebody else's. You want people to see that comic and smile, and say, "Yep, that's your comic, all right." Finding your niche can be put into these 4 simple steps. Write what you know. Find what you're really passionate about, or what you're familiar with, and generate a comic around that. Heck, you can even do spins of the people in your life as characters. For me, it was pretty easy. Before I started doing this, I always knew I would need a real job. I went to school for computer science with a bunch of minors, psych, bio, and economics. I got out of college and started working in the computer field. Right from the start, I knew I wanted to do a comic about working and computers. The trick was, there happened to already be a very successful similar comic out there. You probably heard of it, called Dilbert. Scott Adams and I actually have a similar background. He's more from the engineering side, and I'm more from the software side. But still, my comic would be about dealing with computers and management, just as Dilbert does. I needed something to separate me from Dilbert, not only to help sell it, but to also help explain to myself and others what my comic would be about. I thought, what do I know that separates me from other working comics? This took a bit of thinking and brainstorming and some trial and error, but I had taken a lot of psychology courses, and I will eventually get my PhD in health psychology. I figured I would concentrate more on the office interactions amongst this very eclectic group of people who had been collected to work together. Also, having always had an interest in sci-fi and fantasy, and I'll admit, a bunch of geek stuff, I wanted my comic to have a touch of the geeky and whimsical. I decided to create a comic about people who work in an environment where literally anything could happen. Hence, Working Days was born. Write a log line. It can be very helpful, if not downright mandatory, to compose a log line that sums up your comic in 1 or 2 lines. This first helps you to understand your central theme, the thing that makes your comic. But it also helps you when explaining your comic to other people. Plus, it gives you a blurb about your comic to use for promotion. For Working Days, my initial logline was, "It's a comic about people working in tech." Then, "It's a comic about geeks and cubicles." Finally, "It's a comic about wacky office interactions." Or something like that. Which brings me to my next point. Your logline is not etched in stone. It's more organic than that. It will evolve and change as you become more comfortable with what you want to do. Plus, your writing style might also change the more you write. You will eventually hone in and fine-tune the tone of your voice. Funny though, for all the fine-tuning I have done with Working Days over the years, it's still about wacky office interactions. It's what makes my comic, my comic. Do I ever delve into something different? Sure. From time to time, I may do a generic gag. When you are writing a 365 gags a year, at times you should. But even then, I try to put my own working day spin on it. Pick your format. Once you have your concept and log line down, it's time to pick your format. The formats are pretty basic. Single panel. One panel to tell your story or joke. Multi-panel. 1, 2, or more panels to tell your story. This is more like a comic book. Interactive. Single or multi-panel, but relies on user interacting with the cartoon. Which one is best for you? Well, that depends on you. Each format has its advantages and disadvantages. Single panel strengths. Easier to write because less planning is needed. Can be less work for an artist as they draw one frame. When being used, so they fit in a number of spots. More joke-based. Single panel drawbacks. If you are looking to get into newspapers, many still prefer and pay more for strips. Yep, stripping always costs more. Not as easy to do character-driven humor. More limiting in scope. Multiple panel strengths. Lots of versatility to develop a gag and characters. Often newspapers' preferred format. Multiple panel drawbacks. Usually take longer to lay out, write, and design. Interactive strengths. Can make the reader feel more involved. Still has a new feel. Can do a lot with this format. Interactive drawbacks. If you want to print, you can't do it. Sometimes readers may just want to read. More complicated. Can be a gimmick. Create your starting characters. If you don't have a gag a day type of comic, you will need characters. At least 2. You could have a comic with 1 character, but that would take a lot of talent not to get stale very quickly. You don't want your comic to be a one-note joke. Unless, of course, that one note is way funny. Oh, even if you have a gag-a-day panel, you might want to still develop a few reoccurring characters. Doctor, lawyer, policeman, general archetypes. Archetypes makes it easier for readers to recognize what's going on. Main character. First, decide on your main character. This is the character that is the voice of the strip. The character that readers relate to your comic. In Peanuts, it would be Charlie Brown. Yes, Snoopy was the breakout character in Peanuts. Snoopy was the moneymaker. But Peanuts was about still Charlie Brown, and his frustrations in life, and how he kept hanging in there. Good grief, and all. I like to think of the main character in my strips as an every man or woman. Somebody who the reader can look at and say, yep, been there, done that. Man, that character is a lot like me. I believe it helps if the main character is flawed, because flaws can be interesting. I myself also like to make my main characters to be basically nice people at heart, but that is just a personal choice. In Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin is the main character. Yes, Hobbes gets a lot of funny lines and may be a star, but everything plays off Calvin. After all, this is all taking place in Calvin's imagination. Calvin certainly isn't what you would call your average kid, and can be a bit of a brat, but he is still easy to identify with. That's my big hint here when developing a main character. Make them easy to identify with. My secondary hint is to make your main character be somebody readers can root for. For me, I like to put a bit of myself in all my main characters. In fact, in working days, my main character Jay goes through many of the same things I did when I worked a real job. Of course, most of what Jay goes through is much more wacky than what I experience. But still, Jay's reactions are very similar to mine. My mouth often talks without first consulting with my brain. In my other comic, Maria's Day, the main character is a 10-year-old girl. I am not close to being 10-year-old girl. Maria is far more mischievous and clever than I ever was. but she still has a lot of my own characteristics. She is persistent and stubborn. Plus, she has a fighting spirit with things she is interested in. I believe this makes her relatable. Support characters. Your comic will need at least one support character. You will most likely want 3 or 4 support characters. Note that this number will grow and expand as your comic ages and expands, but it's best to start with a smaller number so readers and you can get to know the characters. It's an organic process. Typical types of support characters are BFF, a best friend, buddy, or confidant that the main character can confide in and bounce ideas and plots from. In Calvin and Hobbes, this would be Hobbes. Authority figures. Somebody who can give the main character both advice and orders depending on the type of strip. In Calvin and Hobbes, this would be Mom, Dad, the teacher, and the sitter. Antagonist. Somebody for the main character to drive crazy. For example, Mr. Wilson in Dennis the Menace. Or somebody to drive the main character crazy and maybe taunt them a bit, such as Lucy in Peanuts. In Rugrats, this is so Angelica. Philosopher. A deep thinking character that can add a bit of thought and diversity to a comic, such as Linus in Peanuts. The seemingly one-note character. A character who is easy to identify by a certain trait that stands out, like Pigpen in Peanuts. These types of characters can be great gag-generating devices, especially if you can add a little personality to them. Naming characters. Naming characters can be tricky. You want the name to be something that will stick in the reader's mind. Additionally, you want the name to stick in your mind so you can quickly identify the character. One thing I do is to name characters after real people in my life. I take their names and twist them just a bit. With a comic like Working Days, it was easy, because I based this comic on my life. Well, a version of my life really twisted and warped. This comes back to writing what you know. For example, Jay, the main character and everyman, was named after me. I cleverly turned John into Jay. Jay's longtime workmate Ed was named after one of my workmates, but I gave him the characteristics of 2 or 3 of my other workmates. My boss was named Linda, and I made the boss in Working Days Rita. For some reason, those names just clicked in my brain. Note, sometimes I would write Rita Gags and accidentally call her Linda. Second note, the real-life Linda is much nicer than Rita, but nice isn't always funny. Third note, I have used actual Linda quotes in Working Days. Our office manager was named Gemma, and I merged her into a super character named Dana. Gemma always seemed to be able to do a million things at once, which seemed almost mystical to me. In Working Days, Dana has magical powers. Our office's main IT geek guy was Ron, and I named the Working Days resident IT guy Roy by 1 letter. Kind of proud of that one. Of course, Roy is a much more exaggerated version than Ron. Our layout and design person was a woman, but when I developed Working Days, I wanted to give the original artist, Andre Noel, a character. So, I made the company design person Andrew. Even though Andrew is a male, he still maintained some of the traits our design woman had. For instance, great with the art, and not so great with the computer. It was like the woman could look at the computer funny, and it would break. We also had an annoying know-it-all guy in the office. I won't mention names, but this character became Sal, because Guy was always sour. Annoying characters may be annoying, but they give everybody a common goal: to avoid the annoying guy. When I started work in the late 80s, computers were just starting to take over the office place, yet we had a lot of older workers who just didn't like the idea of using computers. Hence, Miss Jensen was born. She was named after my poor mom. She was an older person who was happy doing things the old way and saw no reason to switch. Interesting enough, this character started out as a one-note character. Comics can use one-note characters for easy gags. When you write a few thousand gags a year, it helps to have a low-hanging fruit to pick. But the funny thing about Miss Jensen is she evolved as the years went along. Turns out she is related to Chuck Norris, and once babysat Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, who gave her a lot of stock. So, Miss Jensen became rich and went to law school. She now represents the company legally, but still doesn't love computers. Her character grew, changed, and evolved, but her basic core character is still there. I wanted to add an every woman also. So, Sue was born. With a nice, relatable name, she was a mix of many women I knew who worked as aides, but happened to be much sharper than the superiors they were aiding. Therefore, Sue is constantly frustrated by working the hardest and making the least money. Sue is also a tribute to every nurse and medical assistant I know. Finally, I added the beautiful and fiery-tempered Carolina, the girl who can stop men in their tracks with both her looks and her brains. She is a tribute character to my nieces, who are all like that. In summary, I built a series of characters based on people in my real life. How can I give my characters personality? What I do for characters is build a backstory for them. I think a nice backstory makes for a richer character and gives a writer opportunity for gags. To give my characters a fuller backstory, I have a bio sheet for each one. The basic bio sheet consists of name, age, place of birth, education, marital status, job, Mac or PC, iOS or Android, hobbies, favorite foods, favorite TV shows and or movies, favorite color, favorite sports team, favorite Game of Thrones character, favorite book, pet peeves, favorite song, quirks, interesting life events, relatives, heroes, summary. Here's the bio sheet for my main character. Name, J. Johnstone. Age, late 30s. Place of birth, upstate New York. Education, BS in computer science, state school, MS in psych, but you can't tell. Marital status, single but looking. Job, programmer, consultant, IT guy. Mac or PC, Mac. iOS or Android, iOS. Hobbies, World of Warcraft, softball, backgammon. Favorite foods, fried anything. Favorite TV shows and or movies, Star Trek, Star Wars, Cheers, Princess Bride, MASH. Favorite color, green. Favorite sports team, New York Mets and Buffalo Bills. Favorite song, I Want You to Want Me. Favorite Game of Thrones character, Tyrion, because he speaks his mind. Favorite book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Pet peeves, people who smoke, stupid people. Quirks, can't keep his mouth shut when he should. Interesting life events, pitched a one-hitter once, held world record in golf. Relatives, Sister May and nephew Felipe. Heroes, Tom Seaver, Ben Franklin, Steve Jobs, before he went really mad. Summary. Jay considers himself to be a hard-working and persistent everyman, though he has some quirks and certainly some geeky tendencies. He's never seen a Star Trek he didn't like. Heck, he even liked the middle Star Wars movies. He is an early innovator, so he takes a lot of arrows. The basic bio sheet for Chief Geek Roy. Name: Roy Hobbes. Age: late 30s. Place of birth: Cleveland. Education: Master's in Engineering from Ohio State. Marital status: married. Yes, true. Job: tech guy. Mac or PC? Both. iOS or Android? Both. Hobbies: robotics, chess, Klingon, building computers. Favorite foods: taco. Favorite TV shows and/or movies: Battlestar Galactica, both versions. Star Trek, the original. Game of Thrones, Farscape, Westworld, The Simpsons, Doctor Who, Star Wars, but not the middle ones, and Han shot first. Favorite color: brown. Favorite sports team: none. Favorite Game of Thrones character: they are all great. Favorite book: A Brief History of Time. Pet peeves: people who insist you can't like Star Wars and Star Trek. Favorite song: Mr. Roboto. Quirks: tends to forget to wash sometimes, may still believe in Santa. Interesting life events: has a feud with Will Wheaton. Relatives: Kathy, wife, Steve, brother. Heroes: Hawkins, Roz, Nimoy. Summary: Roy loves all things sci-fi. He has never met a futuristic show he does not love. He is a very sweet, innocent person. Seriously thinks he'd make a great Doctor Who. Note: this evolved Roy started out as a totally unmarriable geek, so characters do evolve. Here is the bio for the big boss. Name: Rita Mann. Age: 40s. Claims 20s. Place of birth: claims Washington, D.C., but is actually from Buffalo. Education: M.A. Art, MBA in Business from Brown. Marital status: divorces twice. Job: VP and head of our group. Mac or PC? Whatever is easiest. iOS or Android? See above. Hobbies: the whip, pet snake, hockey, pickleball, kickboxing. Favorite foods: lobster, crab, shrimp. Favorite TV shows and/or movies: Mad Men, Sopranos, The Bachelor, Minions, Orange is the New Black. Favorite color: green. Favorite sports team: Dallas Cowboys, New York Yankees, Montreal Canadiens, Chicago Bulls. Favorite Game of Thrones character: Cersei. Favorite book: The Art of War, she claims. Pet peeves: people above her who tell her what to do, people below her who don't listen to her. Favorite song: Beat It. Quirks: can be a little dense, sees others' flaws very well, but not blind to her own. Loves checking people. Speeches so boring they turn people into potatoes. Interesting life events: briefly dated Mike Tyson, ran of mayor of her town. Relatives: 2 daughters and 1 granddaughter that she loves. Heroes: herself, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, pretty much anybody with money. Summary: Rita is not dumb or lazy. She just believes in having others do the work when possible. She is a big delegator. She is also very aggressive. Just ask her pickleball partner Jay. Note: these bios are living, breathing documents, and always changing and evolving, just like people are always changing and evolving. For instance, Rita and Jay both started playing pickleball when I started playing. If you don't know what pickleball is, Google it. Also, Game of Thrones didn't exist when working days first started, but now characters refer to it a lot. Can you show me some examples of single panel and multiple panel format? The basic structure of the gag from the writer's point of view is the same. Panel, if more than one. Description of what you expect the reader to see. This can be very detailed or just general. A lot depends on the artist. Some like a lot of detail, others like a lot of freedom. Text of the gag. This would include any dialogue characters might be speaking if you have more than one character in a frame that it would read. Character name. Dialogue. If the character is thinking, then after their name, put TB. Here is one of my single-panel gags from Working Days. WD-T. Dana and Jay looking at Baby Groot with headphones on. Baby Groot, Colin. I'm Groot. Dana, Colin. That's all he says, but he's still the best customer service guy we have. It's simple, as Scott Roberts and I have been working together for a while. Note, I start with the gag with an identifying label, WD-T, so Scott has something to refer to if he has questions or comments. Writing a comic with an artist often requires some give or take. Here's a Sunday Dennis the Menace I wrote. D-S201 Top tier, Colin, panel, 1 logo, Colin, title, Colin, snowfall. Panel 1. Dennis walking outside on a snowy day. Panel 2. Dennis looks at a mean-looking kid making a snowball. Middle tier, Colin. Panel 3. Dennis talking the mean kid holding a snowball and looking towards Gina. Dennis. You should be very careful. Panel 4. Dennis to the kid as he throws the snowball at Gina. Dennis. Oh, you shouldn't have thrown that at Gina. Panel 5. The mean kid talks back to Dennis. Mean kid. Why not? Bottom tier, Colin. Panel 6. Mean kid points to Dennis and kind of taunts him. Mean kid. Is she your girlfriend? Panel 7. Dennis shakes his head to the mean kid who is still glaring at him. Dennis. Nope, it's not that. Panel 8. Dennis to the mean kid who gets blasted by a snowball. Dennis. She just throws way harder than you do. This has a lot of detail, because that's how the staff like it. This one never got picked to make the papers, but it still shows the format. Note, the top tier kind of relates to the cartoon, but isn't essential. This is because often newspapers will cut those panels so they can cram in more cartoons. Here's a Sunday Marmaduke I wrote just to show how flexible the format is. Duke-JZ2015S-106. Nightmare. Panel. Marmaduke is sitting behind a desk almost buried under papers. Panel. Marmaduke sitting at a computer typing away frantically. Computer. You have 32 new emails. Panel. An office manager walks in the room with a pile of papers and puts them on Marmaduke's desk. Office manager. The boss wants that report by tomorrow. Panel. Marmaduke sits at his desk. Another person rushes in. Person. Hurry, you're late for staff meeting. Panel. Marmaduke rushes out of his office. Panel. Marmaduke wakes up. He's in his living room next to Mom and Dad. It was only a nightmare. A terrible nightmare. Panel. Mom to Dad as Marmaduke is hugging him. Mom. What's up with Duke? Dad. I have no idea. Here's a Rugrats sample. Rugrats. Comic strip daily gag. JZ-081-R. By John Zakor. October 12, 2002. Panel 1. Drew to Angelica, who is sitting on his lap. Drew. So, what do you want to be when you grow up? Angelica. Queen of the world. Panel 2. Drew talking to Angelica, still sitting on his lap. Drew. Angelica, honey, the world doesn't have a queen. Panel 3. Drew looking at Angelica, who has a sly smile on her face. Angelica, "Give me time, Daddy. Give me time." Or Drew looking at Angelica, who has a confused look on her face. Angelica, "What about Mommy?" Yes, different artists like different presentations. Still, you can see it's all basically the same. Panel 4 also has an alternative ending. Sometimes I like to give the people who choose choices.